It can't be understood through the human intellect. The best way to understand it is to just experience it and to move outside of time and space yourself, similar to what you might do in meditation. It's a great question for some of the channelers that you talk to as well. Give us your concept of time. And all of us come to the conclusion that it's more fluid than we know. So best advice I can give people is just be open to the fact that it's not as locked in as what we feel.
I'd like to welcome to the show, Peter Smith. How you doing, Peter?
I'm real good, Alex. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to our conversation. We're here to talk about your book, Quantum Consciousness. We're going to get into the weeds of this thing called consciousness. That word is thrown around a lot, and quantum consciousness is even thrown around more nowadays. But also a little bit, I want to get started with the work that you were doing with a little known guy named Dr. Michael Newton, was it? Mr. Newton's work in Lives Between Lives, which is a fascinating concept. Anytime I talk to a channeler or I talk to a near-death experiencer, I always go, so what do we do when we're not here? Are we at a bar somewhere on the other side? Are we sitting down? Or I mean, the concerts must be amazing up there. I mean, the musicians who have died. I mean, come on. I mean, so what are we doing? So can you first discuss your work with Dr. Michael Newton?
Yeah. Well, Michael Newton was the first guy that thoroughly mapped the afterlife. And for him, he had a couple of accidental sessions with clients as a psychologist. They flipped off into other lifetimes. And, one person went in between looking for the source of her depression, and she reunited with a soul group. Mm-hmm. So he said, well, what's in between these incarnations? If we accept the fact that reincarnation is a phenomenon, what happens in between those? And we'd seen it as a sort of a misty sort of Bardo type area. Of course, mediums and all sorts of people had been, getting snippets of the afterlife, talking to people, bringing through messages for, a long time. So he took people to the end of a past life. He crossed them over. He followed them in through the front door, through a life review. How did I go in that lifetime, et cetera, et cetera. And then they went into this nebulous sort of now time, which was outside of any of the incarnations. And as they run in linear time, he moved into the space in between. So he had a sweeping view across the lineage of the soul. And he could say to them, how many lifetimes you've had where that happened? And more importantly, how are you setting up this next one that you're going into?
So how did he do that? How did he do that?
Well, he did it through a deep and profound hypnotic trance. But for me, having been in that work for 20 years now, I see it more as an out-of-body experience remembered while still in body. Okay. So he crossed them over into the afterlife, and we're quantumly entangled, if you like, with the soul energy of who we are that transcends time and space. So our soul is here, but Michael Newton found that part of the soul remains there, still in the afterlife. So he bridged that gap so that we connected with that soul energy, and you could sort of have a look around and see what was going on the other side and what your role over there is.
When you say he mapped out the afterlife, what is exactly the map? I know it's a fairly large question, but I mean, what is it? I mean, anyone who's listened to the show knows I've spoken to over 100 near-death experiencers, so many channels, psychic mediums, so on and so forth. So I have an idea from just the mass amount of people and masters I've spoken to what the afterlife is kind of like, but it's still pretty patchy, even after all the research I've done. So from his experience and from your experience doing this work, can you give us kind of a little bit more of the lay of the land, if you will?
Happy to, Alex. And let me tell you where I'm coming from on that as well, because Michael did this 7,000 times.
Wow.
That was the client base before he started to publish his books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, back in the 90s. So he found that, and let me say as well, that members of the Michael Newton Institute have reproduced his body of research 10 times over now.
Okay.
So with amazing. 200 people around the world in different countries and languages, the model is still pretty much the same. But there are some shifts in the research. We can talk a little bit about that too, if you want.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But he found that when you go through this, you leave the body, somehow your soul knows the way home, you rise up out of the body, you drift back towards this other dimension that is the afterlife. And he found that you would usually sort of debrief that life, either in the company of a spiritual guide, somebody like that. They'd help you to understand and glean the learnings from that life. You'd then move through, you might speak to a spiritual council. You might do certain activities in between life that might be creation of energy, or some people work to, progress planets and help to design them. Some people work in different classes in like a learning type environment. And whilst you might learn the theory there, you come back into an incarnation to do the practical exercises of how that looks in real life in 3D. So spiritual councils would normally form a number of people around sort of a semicircle table, and they'd be offering advice and understanding. Usually souls have a certain color and frequency to their vibration there as well. That's always great to ask. But most importantly was the question I loved to ask, Alex, and that was, have you ever incarnated on another planet or in another dimension?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stories that came out of that question were just phenomenal. Stories of water worlds, stories of being an energetic type being in an energy environment, even being different types of animals that we don't have here, or different type of plant life. I had someone told me that they were a rock on another planet just so they could learn stillness. But all of this is really how we set up the learnings for each of the lifetimes that we take.
I think we could barely wrap our heads around just incarnations on Earth. If you start to jump around the universe, it's hard for people to even, I don't think we're there yet. Most people, I'd say most people. It's a difficult thing to kind of wrap your head around. So when someone passes over and they've gone through their life review, we've learned our lessons, what's the next step? Do they go to their quote unquote house on the other side, or the world that they've designed on the others, their condo, on the heavenly condo? From my understanding, you create whatever heaven you want on the other side. So do they go to that place, rest for a while, maybe, but there's no time on the other side. So how does that make sense? There's so many, it's hard to wrap our little heads around this stuff.
Look, it is. And to understand the concept of now time when we live in a linear construct is difficult. And the more of this work I've done over the years, the more I've come to understand that time is a linear construct for our learning, and that it's far more fluid than we know it to be. And, people like Einstein were always talking about the fluidity of time. But when we get over onto the other side, this sweeping view across the lineage of our soul, and we're both this persona, but beyond this persona. And we have people that sit in a chair and they'll go back. We have a particular methodology that we use that starts with linear time. We go back, you've got a client that starts in the chair, then they become a past life persona of, they might be Native American, ancient Greece, any of that sort of stuff. And they may speak a little bit differently, influenced by the environment in which they live in that body. Then they cross over and they're in this other place, and they change into their soul consciousness, which is another voice again, often with another name. I'll say, who am I speaking with now? And they may say Anitha or something like that, some sort of a name that's quite different. But from that, the client will normally come with a list of questions, what they want to know from the other side. And a lot of it's around relationships. Who do I incarnate with regularly? And they'll say someone will come forward and they'll recognize them in their soul form, but it'll be maybe their sister or their husband or whoever it might be from this lifetime. And they recognize them through their soul energy. And so you can start to ask some questions. How many lifetimes have you hung out together? Well, we've incarnated 50 times now together because we just love learning together, and we've played different roles. And sometimes I've been the sister, sometimes I've been the mother, sometimes the father. And this dynamic that they've formed often takes multiple angles across multiple lives to round out the learning at the soul level.
Now, this concept of there is no technically past lives or no technical future lives, that all lives are happening now. Very difficult for you to wrap your head around. Do you have any clarification around that idea? Because again, we're coming from a linear timeline based reality. So we have to say past lives. If just by the nature of the concept of like, oh, ancient Egypt, well, that's in our reality a past life. But really it's going on right now.
Yeah, exactly. First bit of advice I offer people that ask me that, I say, well, don't wrap your head around it because it's not going to fit.
Fair enough.
And there's something about how we're cultured and in society, Alex, to run with linear time and to exist within linear time, and for that to be the construct through which we exist. But when we move outside of that time, everyone sort of has had some sort of time slippage here or there along the way where time has either gone longer or it's gone shorter. Depends on what you're doing, what's happening. Time, as I said before, is far more fluid than we know. If we take, and a quantum physicist will answer this question as well in a way, and I'm certainly not one, but what they'll do is they'll tell you that time is relative. Okay, so when we move into, particularly long when you spend time with some of your relatives, but there's something about the now time that gave us the sweeping view, and this is where Michael's work was so incredible, is it showed us the fluidity of time through the eyes of our soul. And that we could see, well, yeah, I would say to somebody, how many times have you incarnated on Earth? And they will say to me, I've had 180 incarnations on this planet. And I'll say, what are the themes? So what I'd say to people who have trouble offering that is it can't be understood through the human intellect. The best way to understand it is to just experience it and to move outside of time and space yourself, similar to what you might do in meditation. It's a great question for some of the channelers that you talk to as well. Give us your concept of time. And all of us come to the conclusion that it's more fluid than we know. So best advice I can give people is just be open to the fact that it's not as locked in as what we feel.
And the idea that time is relative, that I think everyone at one point or another has felt this, that you go beyond time, where when you're enjoying yourself, time flies. But when you're not enjoying yourself at the DMV, where you get your license here in the States, time goes very slowly. Or you're doing jury duty here, time goes very slowly, generally speaking. But when you're enjoying yourself, time flies. I think we've all felt that. Yeah. Or if you're an athlete or a creative or an artist, that time you're doing your art, that time you're in the flow state. That's another thing that people use that word a lot now, the flow state. Time completely almost disappears. And, I meditate a lot, and my meditation, when I'm in it deep, it'll go like that. And I'll come out of it. I'm like, what was that, an hour and a half? Like I didn't even feel it.
Yeah.
You transcend time. So there are glimpses of that. It's not easily turned on and off, maybe more better so within meditation, but these other aspects of things, it's difficult, but it's like you said, you can't wrap your head around it. It's very difficult to start wrapping your head around this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me reassure you that the DMV experience is actually a global phenomenon.
Okay.
And it's,
you mean, there's no beautiful DMVs in Australia?
No. No. I guess technically they're upside down, but there's still a long queue. Yeah.
I guess that's a very universal truth that all DMVs are painful.
Yeah, absolutely. But I once had a client say to me, and what people love to hear is they love to hear client stories because it makes it real.
Sure.
And I did one of these life between life sessions for a guy once, and we crossed over from a past life. We went into the afterlife. We met his soul group. He had a conversation with some wise beings there. He talked about how he'd set up the life he was in now and what his intentions and purpose were for coming back this time, which is a real power of the work. And he's, I'm starting to bring him back out of spirit and back into his body and all that sort of stuff. And he's got this frown on his face, and he says, blah, blah, blah. And he came back up and he sort of reoriented, and he looked at me and he said, I said, what, are you okay? What's wrong? You look a bit troubled. And he said, why would you bring me back after 20 minutes? I was just getting started. And I said, you've been down there 2.5 hours.
Wow.
So yeah, this time slippage is a real phenomenon.
And well, this is really interesting. I'm assuming you've heard the concept of the Mandela Effect.
Absolutely.
So from your point of view, from the work that you've done, and I talk about the Mandela Effect on the show constantly because I find it fascinating, because there are absolute things that I remember and others remember, and they like, and when you ask, perfect example, this is something very American, but Ed McMahon, who was a comedian, I guess it's a comedian here, who was on the Tonight Show. He was very well known for working with Publishers Clearinghouse, which was basically you get $1 million check, and he would go to people's doors and hand them a check with cameras and balloons. And it was a big thing. It's the 80s, mostly 80s and 90s. And for a generation of people, Ed McMahon was Publishers Clearinghouse. Well, if you go to Publishers Clearinghouse and you ask them, they've said, I'm sorry, Ed McMahon has never worked for us, has never been part of us. And there's just no way. And I'm not the only one. There's so many people. And it goes on and on and on. Where do you think is happening? Because you said the word time slippage. What is happening to a large swath of the population that remember one thing, and another large swath of population that remember something else?
I've seen some of those stories about, the front of a cereal box and how something's spelled and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
Jiffy peanut butter, Jif peanut butter. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we had an incident just yesterday here in the car. My partner and I, we're driving back home from having lunch. And my partner says, that hill wasn't there yesterday. Like, one side of the road is raised up. And she said, do you remember that side of the road being raised up like about 10 feet above the other side of the road with this thing in the middle? I said, oh, I don't really. So what's going on there? And you start to get into multiverse theory. Mm-hmm. And that's about how we move into different realities from the decisions that we make. There's splits in our timelines. We're continuing to unfold in different tracks and all of that. And some people remember one track and one people remember the other track. For me, this is about the thinning of the veil, Alex. And that all of those alternate realities used to be beautifully divided, and our soul would go in a couple of different directions from a decision that we've made. And that's great, because that's multiple learning at the soul level. And this is another one you can't get your head around in human form. But for me, the same way the veil is thinning for the afterlife, which is why there's so many mediums now, so many people are channeling, so many people are having past life flashes, that veil is getting thin. But I actually believe that the veil between the different realities is getting thinner as well. So we have different timelines bleeding into each other, and people are jumping between those timelines because of the thinness of that veil.
So when you jump a timeline, so let's say right now we're having this conversation, and then I decide to ask one question this way, and then in another, I'm like, oh no, but let's go with this other. So we ask two different questions. So now there's two different versions of this conversation that are going to finish off how they're going to finish off. Are there two of me at that point? And is it, if there is two of soul level or versions of me in this multiverse idea, well, is it with every decision? Because then it's an infinite amount of you in this incarnation. Let's not even talk about past and future lives. Let's just talk about this incarnation. Does it split off into literally an infinite amount of versions of you learning at different levels? Did I marry Susie? Did I take that job with Bob? Did I go to school, or decide to just smoke weed, or like whatever the differences are? How many different versions are there? Is that kind of what's happening?
I've got my own speculation on this, because a lot of my work has been about blending the quantum physics with the spiritual side, and consciousness is the common language between the two, which is so powerful. For me, I feel that some of these splits in the timeline doesn't happen with every tiny decision. And in the book, I write about toast. Do I have jelly on my toast? Do I have peanut butter on my toast? Do I have Vegemite on my toast, which is what we do a lot of down here? You know, does that give me 3 different toast realities? My take is that our timeline will split into the different realities in collaboration with our soul. And if the soul can learn something from that other line, it will follow into the other reality. I don't necessarily run with the quantum physics component that every small thing, I pick up my pen, I put my pen down, creates all these different realities. I don't necessarily go with that because I think we're powered by a greater consciousness ourselves. Even quantum physics is part of that beautiful soup of the all there is that is created by a power of which we're all part of, but is far greater than we believe ourselves to be in human form. So I think there's a threshold of where these realities do continue to form because there are other paths of learning. And I think if something is another path of learning, yeah, absolutely, another reality. But
So
as
I
for the
think
tiny little small decisions, no. That's my take.
I think your next book should be called The Toast Realities. And because it's such a fascinating idea. Like, so you have 3 options for toast. Is it jelly? Is it butter? Is it Vegemite? Okay. Well, does that really evolve your consciousness, evolve your
Exactly.
soul, and any 3 of those options? Now, if the jelly toast is hit by a comet, absolutely. You know, if there's an earthquake on the butter toast, oh, absolutely. There's absolutely. You know, if if there's something else that happens, an explosion happens at this. So that makes sense. But the toast itself is not something that is going to create a new reality. So it's going to be a little bit larger. I like the way you put it. It's not like it's large events. It's events that your soul can grow from. So that means that the soul is growing at such a rapid rate down here, more so than it does on the other side. Is it the equivalent of reading about how to bake and actually baking or cooking?
Well, I'd call it baking boot camp down here.
Okay.
Because it's such an intense experience with all of our human emotions and the vibrational frequencies that we have. And one of the things I've discovered, Alex, is that these realities are closer than we know. I mean, it's like we're just changing the dial on the radio, and all of a sudden it's the same box, but you're in a completely different frequency. And I found that many, many years ago when I was doing past life work, you'd have to sometimes labor to get these people across into these other lifetimes. But with the realities, they seem so much closer due to the greater level of quantum entanglement we hold with those other versions of ourselves in this type of body. So for me, yeah, they're right there and they're waiting to be discovered. And I think a lot of this goes back to the pre-planning before we come here. I mentioned before in Michael Newton's model of the spiritual universe that we set up a life before we come. I think we actually set up some of these decision points as, okay, I'm going to get to that decision point in my life. It's preset. I'll end there. I'll go in different directions, and the soul follows in both. I've had people say to me over the years, I always knew my dad was going to die when I was young. Or I always knew there'd be a big car accident in my life that would change my life. I've been seeing flashes of things. And that's from the precog that comes from the pre-soul planning before we arrive.
That's a really interesting concept because I've never really heard it presented that way before, the precog. I mean, if you've seen the Minority Report, I'm a movie guy, so I always use movies as a reference. But if you use them, a great movie, but the precog idea of where you know the future before it happens. Well, there's elements of that in our lives all the time. Like you pick up the phone and you know who it is before it rings.
Yeah.
Or stuff like that kind of happens. But having large precog ideas or events that are almost haunting you or that you have a gut feeling about is really, really interesting. I mean, have you met with a lot of clients who've had those kind of things happen, that they felt those kind of things?
There's this little thing called Soul CPH.
Well, what's that? I've never heard that before.
Well, the soul's always there.
Sure.
I mean, the hardware and the software, we're a complete unit, and the soul's the software. And let me say that how much the soul loves us too, Alex, because it's really important to remember that the soul chose to be us. Your soul chose you, head of 8 billion other options on this planet, and you're the only one that would do. Okay, so I believe that's the greatest act of unconditional love that we will ever experience.
Got it.
Okay, so that's how much our soul loves us. And our soul steers us. So some of this soul seepage are these funny little bits of influence that move their way through into our life, and they give us those moments of blissful insight when we know we're on track, or something happens that goes beyond coincidence, like Carl Jung's theory of synchronicity, something that doesn't make sense but still happens. And I remember when I first found Journey of Souls, Michael Newton's first book. I was a young hypnotherapist looking for a gift for a friend, stood in front of at Borders bookshop. If you remember Borders, they're gone now.
Of course.
Yeah, I stood there and I stepped forward with eyes shut, and I pulled a book off the shelf, and it was Journey of Souls. It was this book. And when I read the back of that, something happened inside of me that felt like an earthquake had happened in Borders bookstore. And I look around and everyone else is just reading books or drinking coffee or doing the stuff that people used to do at Borders. And so it was one of those moments that was a soul seepage. That was my soul saying, this is an important moment. Don't lose the energy of what's just happened. And the rest was history. And, I went and learned the work, got to work with Michael, led his organization for 10 years. And that was because it was one of those quintessential spiritual moments of truth.
It's really interesting. I'm thinking about that kind of scenario in my life where I didn't come from a movie family. I was as far away from Hollywood as almost you can be. I was in South Florida. And it was the 80s. So late 80s, not a lot of information about movies, movie making, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Now it's everybody. Everybody knows how to make movies. It's everywhere. You can YouTube everything. But back then it wasn't. So it wasn't even considered a career. But yet I was looking for a part-time job, and the job I chose was a video store. Oddly enough. It wasn't like I need to work. It was, this might be cool. And then my grandfather gifted me a video camera, a little Hi8 old school video camera, which I started to play around with. And I'm like, And then it's just so fascinating how those things just started to guide me in a direction of this insane idea of becoming a filmmaker in a time where that wasn't even a thing, let alone for my Latino family who looked at me like, are you crazy? What? What are you going to be, Spielberg? This makes no sense. So it's fascinating that there are moments like that. There are books like that happened. Autobiography of a Yogi is one of those books for me. When I was given that book, it was just like, I've had books that have almost vibrate when I picked them up. They're like, the information is so important to my evolution in this life that after I read that book, I was a changed person, like completely changed. And there are a handful of those books that were gifted to me, or at least recommended to me, that change your whole perception. So as we were talking about alternative realities, I'm like, well, there's a reality where I didn't start the show.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that reality would go. I wouldn't be happy about that reality. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be in that reality. But I wonder what would have happened. You know, what would have happened if I didn't get that job at the video store?
Yeah.
What if my grandfather hadn't given me a video camera? Like, what would have happened to my life? Where would I be? What interests would have been pulled towards? It's pretty fascinating. You start thinking about the what ifs, and then not only the what ifs of if I would have dated her, or if I would have gotten that job, but then thinking, oh, wait a minute, there is a version of me going down that road. What is that like? What is that Alex or that Peter dealing with? Like, it starts to really hurt your head a lot when you start thinking that much about it.
Well, one thing I'll say about those books that vibrate as well is that books come through authors and not from authors.
Agreed, 100%.
And I remember the Quantum Consciousness book, the Celeste Kelly book, the last two I've written. I remember going back and rereading what I've done and saying, "Hey, this sounds pretty good. I don't remember writing this."
I say that all the time. I'm like, who wrote this? This is fantastic.
Yeah. So it's like the messages are permeated with these frequencies that people need. And we all know that there are beautiful frequencies coming through from other places.
Oh, I mean, Autobiography of a Yogi is one of those books. I mean,
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
those words are still vibrating after years,
Yeah,
decades after his passing. And many, I mean, from the Vedic texts to, I mean, so many ancient wisdom, I mean, the Tao Te Ching and so on. It is pretty fascinating. The whole concept of the multiverse. Do you think now that there's so much talk about the multiverse and parallel realities, these are concepts that are being tossed around
yeah,
fairly in the zeitgeist, in popular culture now, where 10 years ago the multiverse was really on the fringe, either science or sci-fi, comic books, the geeks that doesn't read comic books like myself were discovering the multiverse idea. But now
yeah,
people are talking about this conversation. Like, we're really having
yeah.
deep conversations about parallel realities, the multiverse, all that kind of stuff. Why do you think that's happening now and not 50 years ago?
My take is it's the evolution of consciousness, Alex. We're ready to know that we are multidimensional beings living in a multiverse. And some of the work that we've been doing is we've been connecting with some of these other versions of ourselves, because the quantum entanglement is so high that we can have conversations with these others. And I've been training guys to do that for a number of years now. As you go to a decision point, you wonder what would have happened in the other direction. And we take them out of their body and we go to a meeting place where they can talk to that other version of themselves with the full and complete intention of raising the vibration of both. Because when we can swap intel, share wisdom, offer advice, do healing, whatever it might be, that raises the vibration of our multidimensional self times two. And even
Can you
to offer information and get gratitude back, that's a beautiful exchange.
can you explain the concept of quantum entanglement just a little bit to people who don't understand what that is? Because it's a very important concept from quantum physics that the spiritual space is really grabbing a hold of, because it just really reinforces the concept that we are all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, but that wasn't all that helpful.
Yeah.
For me, quantum entanglement is the personal experience of everything being connected. And it's like that example you mentioned before, Alex. You know who's ringing when the phone goes, so you know who it's going to be. And for us, there's the concept that once two particles have a relationship, they can never be disengaged, even though they might be light years away from each other. And it's like the connectivity with the people that we're close to is always there. I've had people say to me, I knew the moment my dad died. I knew the moment that this happened or that happened. It's because we are connected, and when we move into this ocean of consciousness that connects us all, we can feel the sensations and trust our intuition to know things that we wouldn't know otherwise. So for me, it's about personal connectivity into this whole tapestry of all there is. And it takes many different forms, large and small.
But quantum entanglement alone, just that one concept in quantum physics, throws materialism and space and time out the window, essentially.
It does. It does.
So by doing that, I'm assuming there's been some pushback from the physics community against
Well,
the.
I don't talk to those guys really much. I've had a couple of chats with a couple of quantum physicists over the years, and some of them are really interested in
Sure.
consciousness.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting how these two worlds are starting to combine more and more and more. Let me ask you, what do you think our understanding of consciousness is being impacted by this idea of this parallel realities and multiverse?
I think we're slowly discovering that consciousness is bigger than we thought, Alex.
Mhm.
What is consciousness? I think everything is consciousness, but there's an infrastructure behind it as well. And people say to me, you know, what is consciousness? And I answer it in a way that says that, well, the universe is energy. Everything's made up of energy. That's the infrastructure of the entire universe. And a Reiki master will tell you that, a quantum physicist will tell you that, is that everything is energy. But then there's a layer on that energy that is like consciousness, and that's what brings that infrastructure to life. And we are walking examples of that life because we are consciousness. We are all connected to everything and everyone on that infrastructure of energy. And then we surf our way through that through our awareness. So where we put our focus, where it's our, call it our observer effect, call it whatever you want to, where we put our focus, that is where it takes us in the experience of that consciousness on that infrastructure of energy. So, I mean, this gets complicated. So I'll try and use an analogy. It's if you look at the ocean, okay, the ocean floor is the infrastructure of energy. The water in the ocean is consciousness because it flows everywhere and it's all connected. And our awareness are the sea creatures that move through that ocean of consciousness, supported by the sea floor, to have the experiences that they have.
From my experiences talking to near-deathers, and I'm assuming from yours as well, from talking to life between life regressions, on the other side, there is no time or space. So things happen instantly. You think it, you're there. It's an instant scenario. That's, I'm assuming, more of what quantum entanglement is at the highest level, where down here it's as much as we can make it work in the three-dimensional space, in the material space. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's a great statement. The instantaneous manipulation of energy is a real characteristic of the spiritual realm and beyond. And I think a lot of the things, the experiences that we have on the other side, are almost metaphoric, because we need to be able to integrate them. And this is back to my comment before about how human consciousness is at a stage where we're able to understand our multidimensional realities while still in 3D. This is a big shift for the evolution of consciousness, because more advanced races that are out there apparently express and live and know their multidimensional nature of being. We're moving towards that as part of our own evolution. But yeah, when we're out of our body and we're not restricted by 3D, we are limitless. We can do anything that we want. It's a beautiful thing, but those experiences still need to be integrated here so that the awareness increases. So some of the things over there are a little metaphoric, like meeting in a garden with your spiritual guide, or going to a temple, that sort of stuff. Did someone build a temple over there? Well, no, it's a construct for learning that we bring back into here in a way that we can integrate it.
Well, I mean, if you look at what, like, the eternal Saint Babaji from Yogananda's book, who's apparently still alive, been alive for about 2,500 years or more, here helping humanity. In the book, he creates a crystal castle instantly out of his own will. He's at a whole other level. Let's just throw it there. He's Neo, for lack of a better word. He's Neo in the Matrix. He understands the code and can manipulate it however he likes. But that is also how a lot of these spiritual masters who've walked the earth, either ascended masters or walking masters, have understood our construct, this simulated reality that we're in, at such a high level that, for lack of a better word, they understand the code. And because they understand the code of it, they can manipulate the code. Hence, yogic powers, miracles, things like that. What looks to us as miracles is just a manipulation of reality, because they just understand things at a different level. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a great statement.
Yeah.
And I think we're in the process of gradually uncovering our magnificence so that we can know who we really are. And, one of the questions I've had over the years from clients has been, I just want to know that I'm normal. And I say, well, you're actually paranormal.
Right. We're all, well, I mean, if you just even listen to what Jesus said back in the day, everything I can do, you can do, and more. There's not special beings that come down. There might be more evolved soul-wise to get to these points, but we're all capable of it, every single one of us. During all of your work, have you had a profound session that really just rocked your world in a way that just changed you? And what was that session? What happened?
You mean for me as the facilitator, or me as the client?
Both, either one.
Yeah. Okay. let me offer a couple of little snippets that would be helpful for people as well. And
Sure.
this goes back to that magnificence of who we are. And I once had a client, and we're in the life between lives state, and they speak from their soul, Alex. They're in a different person, different voice, everything. And I said to this client, I said to her, "Why did you choose this body?" And she says to me, "Well, I'm a researcher from another dimension, and I'm researching the human brain. And I'm here to do research. The best way to do that was to actually incarnate and have one." I said, "Oh, how that's going?" She says, "It's going very well." She says, "Do you have any questions?" I'm a bit stuck for an answer. So I pulled something out of the air and I said, "Well, why do we only use a certain percentage of our brain, like 15 or 20%? And she said to me very matter of factly, "Who told you that?" And I said, "Well, that's what our scientists are saying." And she says, "Well, they're wrong." She says, "The only reason you think that is because you haven't invented the machines that can measure what the brain is actually doing." And I thought, wow, imagine if you had one of those machines.
Yeah.
But that was just fantastic.
Well, I mean, but to be fair, there are things now that we're able to see with machines and technology. 100 years ago, we would have been heresy. We would have been burned at the stake.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, so that is not that far of a stretch. I mean, 100 years from now, that we're able to check, that we were able to measure psychic ability, levels of consciousness. I don't know, whatever those things that the brain is doing, being able to manifest and create your reality based on your focus. Those might be a measurable thing in the future. Why wouldn't it be? It's as insane as saying that there is radio waves in the air 200 years ago. Like, people were like, "What are you talking about? You're insane."
I love that example because all of that is out there and we can't see it.
Correct. Yeah.
And all you got to do is turn your radio on and adjust that frequency, and you can get a dozen different stations in 10 seconds. It's just fantastic. And I love that as an analogy. And something I heard Bruce Lipton say once, which I loved about the radio as well. And he said, looking for consciousness in the brain is like looking inside the radio for the announcer.
That's a great statement. What is some of the biggest misconceptions about quantum consciousness that people have out there?
Yeah, well, let me define it first, because it's important that those two words work together. And for me, quantum physics is the science of possibility. Okay, you've got, for example, M theory, which is talking about 11 different dimensions, and the maths works. One of them is time, the other 10 are space. We're mathematically condoning that these other dimensions actually exist. So for me, quantum physics is starting to ask the right questions, and they don't know they have the answers. And I think Tom Campbell said it beautifully on one of your chats. They got no idea. So, quantum physics is the science of possibility, and consciousness is the fabric of the universe. Okay, that's the all there is. Consciousness is the lifeblood that brings that infrastructure to life. When you put quantum consciousness together, you've got the science of possibility and the fabric of the universe. You put them together, and it's important for people to know that we are quantum consciousness. Okay.
Gotcha.
So the misconceptions, going to that, the misconceptions are that we are limited. People see quantum physics as science. It's as much philosophy as it is science. People see consciousness of I'm awake or I'm asleep. That's not right either. I think one thing that we've been trained to do in human form is to live our limited lives when we are so much more. So for me, the greatest misconception is that the truth has been hidden from us, that we are limitless, we are magnificent beyond our knowing, we are multidimensional beings in a multiverse, and we will never die, we will continue, and we're here to make a difference to the world.
What would you say to somebody whose brain is frying right now because everything that we're talking about goes against the programming that they've grown up with?
Yeah. Move from the brain into the heart,
Move
because
from the brain.
that's the gateway to the soul.
So, what advice would you give somebody who is saying this is all a bunch of hogwash? This is all crazy. You're all nuts. Be the
Yeah.
skeptic. What would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, I was a good skeptic in the early days. That's how I got into this, is because came from non-believer, which I think is healthy.
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah. I would say don't take our word for it. If you're open to it, have the experience. Explore, whether it's buying a book or whether it's going to a workshop or whether it's doing a session with someone who knows what they're doing, whatever it might be, just explore, because you don't understand your limitlessness until you start to explore it. And then it's like a trail of breadcrumbs that leads to your awakening.
Are there going to be any, or do you foresee any significant advancements in quantum physics that are going to shape our collective reality in what we're doing in the spiritual space?
Probably not my field of quantum physics itself, but if I could offer the quantum physicist something, is to move beyond being a scientist and be an explorer. And I think we discover more when we forget everything that we've ever learned and we move beyond the scientific restrictions, which might have to do about research funding, peer review. All of these things are designed to trap us into a materialistic sort of view of science. But my take is that science was originally invented to explore the new horizons and, do it with the eyes of wonder of a small child. That's what I'd offer the scientists.
Do you believe that not only do we individually have consciousness, but there is a consciousness for humanity and arguably a consciousness for the planet that is shifting right now in a way that has been more profound than any other time in human history regarding the last, not just the last 6,000 years, which is what mainstream archaeologists say that we've been around, but more so 100,000 years, 200,000 years, however long we've been here. Do you believe that?
I do. I'd not just believe it, Alex, I get to live it through the eyes of my clients and the people that we teach this work to. We're forever starting new projects, we're opening new boundaries, we're surrendering more and more. Even Michael Newton's original work is now evolving. And then the Michael Newton Institute, we're working on that at the moment as well. The quantum consciousness work that I'm doing, we're now moving further out from some of the quantum principles and exploring more from the consciousness end, from the quantum end. I think everything is continuing to unfold, and not just that, but it's speeding up. And I think that we are at the horizon of a whole new consciousness for humanity as we discover more of ourselves. I'm having conversations with people, like you said before, I'm having conversations with people I wouldn't have had 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, 100 years ago, they would have burned us at the stake, and many of us did that.
Mm-hmm.
But, I just think that we're in the middle of a great awakening. And what we see in the turmoil in the world is actually a characteristic of change. And the things that we're changing need to come into our line of sight so that we can feel into them, to know that we don't want that anymore and we're going to let it go. And I think that's going to set humanity free.
So moving forward, yeah, because that's a good point, that there is a lot of stuff going on right now in the world. In this great time of great awakening, where there is these conversations happening more and more all the time. If the numbers of my show are in the indication, that means that there's people who really want this information, who are searching for this information. But at the exact same time as this positive aspect of humanity is growing, the negative seems to be growing at a similar rate, where there's wars and conflicts from thousands of years ago boiling up, ideas of racism coming out into the forefront on all fronts. It's fascinating to see all of that's happening at the same time. But do you think it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets a little bit better, quote unquote, from your perspective in your work?
My take is that it's always been there.
Oh yeah, no question.
And you can't heal something that until it comes into your line of sight. You can't decide that you don't want it anymore. And I think it looks like it's getting worse, but I sense it was always there originally anyway. But when you clean out your cupboard, you come across the cobwebs.
You got to go
And
in
I
the
think
back, in the
humanity's
back
doing that
corners.
big
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
We did some research at Michael Newton Institute, and there's a um, I just put this to the side in case I could use it as a comment. But what we did, we took 25 people down into this in between spiritual type state and the other
Hmm.
side, and we said, what's happening in the world. And this was with everything that's happened over the last few years. And I'll just do one little quote, which was really powerful. Imagine a table covered with debris. Um, this was about the whole COVID thing as well. Comes along with a sweeping arm and it completely clears the table off. Now it's got nothing on it. Humans being asked, what do you want to put back on the table? And what do you want to leave behind? And I think that summarizes where humanity's at. What do we want to leave behind? Let's find the pieces and let's bring them into our line of sight and let's let them go.
That was beautiful, by the way. What is the most important message you want people to take away from the relationship between quantum physics, consciousness, and our spiritual existence?
You are a unique collection of subatomic particles. You are powered by consciousness. You are quantum consciousness. You are the spiritual being having the human experience. And you are multidimensional. So I would just offer to people that what you've asked in that question, Alex, is a great summary of who they are, because everyone is all of that. And when we transcend the societal conditioning that we've been offered since we were kids, it permeates our business systems, medical systems, education systems, all of it. It's all permeated with you are limited. And I want to say that that's all based upon a lie. So when you find your own truth, you're set free from the matrix, if you want to call it that. I think everyone is Neo.
Everyone has the potential to be Neo. There's no question
Yeah.
about it. No question about it. One other thing, you said that Mr. Newton's or Dr. Newton's foundation had changed a little bit of his findings over the course of their. What were those some
Yeah.
of the differences between his work and the Institute's work?
Yeah. Michael passed now 7 years ago, so it's been a while that we've carried on his work. It's in 40 countries, 25 languages, reproducing what he originally found. But we're seeing a letting go of the structure. And some of the main trends that we're seeing is people don't need the whole structure that I described to you earlier in this conversation. People are not needing that sort of structure to be able to get the information they need. We've got a lot of people who are here incarnating on Earth now who have a lineage that goes off-world, that have incarnated in other places, other dimensions, etc. And they've been drawn here to be part of this incredible change. You've got to change the ingredients of the cake if you want to bake differently.
Mm-hmm.
And thirdly, there's this huge shift, Alex, from me to we. Like I've been doing the Life Between Lives work for 20 years. And I look at people 15, 20 years ago when they were first coming to me and they would say, what's my purpose for this lifetime? What am I here to do?
Mm-hmm.
Now people are saying, I'm here to do something, to be part of something that's far bigger than me. I've come here for the awakening of consciousness. So the shift from me to we, I think, is a great indication of our shift into this oneness that we're starting to experience more of. And the way to experience oneness is to work out where you're not in the oneness. And those are the pieces that need to be fixed.
Now, Peter, I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all my guests.
Okay.
What is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
I mean, it's about being in resonance with your soul and the plan that you came here to do, and to contribute to something beyond yourself. And I feel that that brings a level of resonance to your life that just allows you to experience fulfillment, to know that you're on track, and that allows you to be at peace.
If you can go back in time and talk to little Petey, what advice would you give him?
Get out of the banking industry quicker.
But in another reality, you did get out of the banking earlier. So that
Yeah,
Pete is living a much higher life than you are, sir.
I had 20 years in corporate life. But what that taught me, it taught me a lot about leadership, taught me a lot about communication.
Sure.
And when the Michael Newton Institute needed a finance policy, I was the guy to write one for them so that we were sustainable for future generations.
And
so everything serves. But I'd also say, more seriously, I'd say to little P, maintain the eyes through which you see the world that are full of awe and wonder, and hold on to that as you get older, because they will steer you from the purity of your soul.
Is that the reason why children have such a purity of heart? Because they're closer to source. They just got here, so they haven't been kind of muddied up by the system as much. And
I believe so.
And also, as you get older, when you're closing in on the end, you start to change as well in other ways as well.
Yeah, you sort of revert back. And I've got a mum who's close to transition now. And she sees things. Sometimes she grabs things in the air. What you doing there? And she says, oh, no, this just needs to be fixed. Is she opening a portal to the afterlife? Is she, having a memory of picking fruit when she was a kid? Not sure what she's doing, but I know that she's getting closer, and the environment around her is changing. She sees things now. I think she's piercing the veil.
How do you define God or source?
Ultimately, it comes back to two things. It comes back to love, and it comes back to us. And if I look at that ocean of consciousness that I talked about, all those water droplets are permeated with love. There's something in water and consciousness that is yet to be discovered, and will be at some point. I've had clients tell me about that we're missing what the potential of water really is, and we're like 70% water as well. So there's something there that's going to be uncovered at some point. But for me, I don't have a traditional biblical view of God. I have it as sort of the oneness of which we are all a part, and together in that oneness we are God.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
I feel it's to learn and grow and evolve. But if I look at why do we take human form, the purpose of a life, I like to feel that it's about making a difference in the lives of others.
And where can people find out more about you and the work you're doing?
Michael Newton Institute. We're out there at newtoninstitute.org. The other work that I do with quantum consciousness is quantumconsciousness.com.au, and we have an institute, again, with 60 people around the world.
And
Institute for Quantum Consciousness. Yep. Institute for Quantum Consciousness.com. There's that book, and more recently I wrote a book following that one, The Transcendence of Celeste Kelly. This is my worn version. Nice. But in that book, I put together a whole aspect of all of the work that I've done over 20 years. I built it into a story about a quantum physicist that goes chasing consciousness. People try to stop her. Her father died in mysterious circumstances because he was issuing free energy. And she accidentally stumbles across the metaphysical approach that quantum physics has been missing. And she finds a way in which to collapse timelines into a future Earth that is everything that we want it to be.
Beautiful, my friend. And do you have a parting message for the audience?
Go and explore. Discover who you really are. And that will not just be great for you, but it'll be great for everybody around you, because you'll encourage them to do the same. For me, it's the ripple effect. One person wakes up, tells another person who wakes up, tells another couple who wake up, and we can take humanity into a whole new consciousness and finally understand the potential of who we are.
Peter, thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate this conversation and everything you're doing for the world, my friend. So thank you, and I appreciate you.
I've got to say right back at you, Alex, you're having some conversations that are changing lives. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.